So I have on the line, man who's written a really important book, and the book is Why Johnny Still Can't Read or Write or Understand Math and What We Can Do About It. Andrew Bernstein is the author. And I'm telling you, I've been looking through your book, Andrew Bernstein. It is really important. Why don't you tell people, let's go a little in the background if we can.
Yes.
How well educated was an eighth grader in 1920 versus 2020?
Well, the school system, certainly prior to the early 20th century, the school system was vastly superior to what it is today, and certainly there were no reading problems. There was no remedial reading problems until early to mid 20th century in the United States. Rudolph Flesch, in his 1955 book Why Johnny Can't Read, a famous book, pointed that out. Prior to the advent of progressive education, which should be called regressive education, the average eighth grader in the United States 120 years ago probably had the equivalent of a college today.
No question. I only vaguely know this. I don't expect you to know this, but if you do, comment on it. If not, obviously we'll move on. But to the best of my recollection, the soldiers on either side in the Civil War, their letters are Shakespearean compared to what a high schooler could write today.
Yeah, I've read that too, Dennis, and I don't doubt it. The education in the United States prior to the imposition of government schools or public school system, roughly in the mid-19th century, and certainly prior to the regressives or the so-called progressives in the early 20th century, education in the United States was outstanding in the Revolutionary period, in the colonial period before that, in the early 19th century. We have a lot of proxy data, supporting that. But my favorite point, Dennis, was that the essays of the Federalists, which are very sophisticated political reasoning, written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, in support of the Constitution for the fledgling republic, those Federalist papers were written largely as newspaper editorials to be read by every man and every woman. And unfortunately today, my college students would struggle with those.
Your college students don't know the difference between it and it.
Yeah, unfortunately, and they're good kids. I want to point out these are the college kids that I teach at various New York area colleges. They're good kids. They're good American kids. They're willing to work hard, and they want to have a successful career. They want romantic love. They want to be happy. But the school system has just failed them abysmally, and they don't know the first thing about American history.
All right, so now tell my listeners about John Dewey and whether it is fair to isolate one person as the big culprit. I'll come back to you again. The book is Why Johnny Still Can't Read, Andrew Bernstein. It is up at DennisPrager.com. Who was John Dewey, and what damage did he do to American education?
Well, Dennis, John Dewey was a philosophy professor for many years at Columbia University, and he had a major influence on Teachers College at Columbia, which was the leading teacher training institute in the United States at that time. And his disciple, William Hurt Kilpatrick, also has to get plenty of the blame here for spreading the ideas of progressivism through the teachers' colleges. But the main idea, and Dewey and Kilpatrick, I think, are the two main culprits here. The main idea was to severely cut down the academic program for most students. remember, IQ testing had just come in at that time. So the idea is IQ test the kids, find the best and the brightest. They get the full academic program, math, science, history, literature. And the rest of us, we don't need that much academic training. We get vocational training so that we could work in the factories or work as farmers. And the idea was that the intellectual elite would get academic training, go to college, and they would govern in the legislature and in the classroom, and the rest of us would be good at our jobs and obey the wise rules of the state. And so they deliberately severely dumbed down the educational program in the American schools, basically to push communism on us so that we could obey we have an all-powerful state and that we would obey. Most of us would simply obey. And by the way, Dennis, Dewey, Kilpatrick, and these guys, in the 1920s, where did they pilgrimage? They went to the Soviet Union.
I was just going to ask you about that. Go ahead. Yeah, that's... Why doesn't that invalidate them at the outset? I mean...
Yeah, it does. For rational human beings, it does. I mean, I can't even say this with a straight face, although it's not funny. They went to the Soviet Union under Stalin, and they praised the Soviet school system because, the Soviet school system taught the kids that the state comes first. You live for the state, you obey the state, and you don't pursue your own personal happiness. You're not selfish, And so, yeah, that's... They were supporters of the communist system, basically, and they wanted the schools to train us to be obedient to the state.
Wow, and this was John Dewey. By the way, you mentioned, I did not know that he was at Columbia Teachers College, or even, did he help start it? Is that what you said?
No, Dewey taught in the philosophy department.
I know that, but how did that, but... He was at Columbia, and Columbia's Teachers College. How does that connect to John Dewey?
William Hurd Kilpatrick considered himself Dewey's leading disciple, and he headed Columbia's Teachers College.
Okay, fine. Okay, so that's how, through his disciple. Fair enough. So to this day, it is probably the worst teachers' college, and most teachers' colleges are destructive. But I would say Columbia remains probably the worst in the country. The book, folks, is Why Johnny Still Can't Read. In America today, I don't know if you'll know the answer, but I don't know who else to ask, but do you get a better education in public school in Florida than in Minnesota?
I don't know the answer to that, Dennis.
This is what I'm asking. The people who reject progressive ideas teach kids better. That's really what I'm asking. I'm using Florida and Minnesota as paradigms.
I would think so. But I think the real issue is the homeschoolers generally.
Who tend to be conservative.
Yeah, and they generally reject the progressive ideas. They want their kids to learn math and science and literature and history. They have this funny idea. They want the kids to be strong readers, and they use phonics to teach reading. It may be that in the conservative states like Florida or Texas, the government schools are less bad than in...
Yeah, I am very curious about that. But anyway, I'm with you. I passionately advocate homeschooling. People are afraid to do it. So the scores keep going down, don't they?
Yes.
So let me ask you another question. I don't know the answer to this. It doesn't make sense to me. Since the scores are going down, and it's such a slap in the face of all the teachers' unions that advocate all these progressive policies, why don't they just lower the standards so that it doesn't look like the kids aren't reading at below 8th grade level?
Well, they have done that. The reading levels of the material taught in the English courses. I had the one example in the book where from Texas, high schools 100 years ago. The ninth grade reading list, they were reading. I forget, Nathaniel Hawthorne, James Fenimore Cooper. The reading levels went from ninth to 12th grade, whereas today the reading levels in high schools in Texas, ninth grade, is like 6th grade to 8th grade.
Oh yeah, that's right. So they have, even with the cheapened standards, they're falling below grade level.
Yeah, they don't use look. There's still a lot of really good, dedicated classroom teachers in the public school system. I want to stress that, but they have to fight against the stifling bureaucracy and the bureaucracy. The teachers' colleges, the state departments of education, and the federal departments of education, the real powers in the government school system, militate against the use of phonics. They don't want the kids to read.
Yeah, I don't understand that. Other than just to be a wrecking ball.
Readers will be thinkers, and they may question the why.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. All right, my friend, you did a great job. Folks, the book is up at DennisPrager.com. Thank you. Why Johnny Still Can't Read. Yep.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Great being on yourself.